Hello traders, welcome to your market update for Thursday the 19th of March 2015, and overnight we've seen some pretty extraordinary price action. Everything was attributed to the US dollar and the Fed's statement. We had some data earlier on the night, but that was just completely ignored, thrown out the window, and everybody got excited with the Fed's policy. So let's get into that. We'll talk about that a fair bit as it was a very significant move, and we'll see what we can come up with in terms of future trading opportunities. Okay, so the Fed initially in the statement early on, everybody was anticipating that they would drop the word patient, and that's what prevails. So it wasn't any major surprise. However, the biggest surprise was that the Fed has cut their GDP forecasts, their inflation forecasts, and they've also lowered their unemployment rate forecast. Now, this is in the short term. They did. Janet Yellen did explain this later on in the Q&A, but initially the market grabbed hold of those negatives and went, well, we're not going to be cutting rates anytime soon, and the US dollar was sold off heavily. Now, they also have a Fed dot chart, and that's where the Fed will outlay their views for different aspects of the economy, and overall it showed that they will be moving towards a later tightening cycle. And all that did was rule out a rate hike for next month. So it wasn't that big of a deal, and there were some questions around this dot chart, basically saying that it's not overly accurate, but we won't bother about getting into that. But Janet Yellen also emphasised that the Fed members are very positive for the overall economy, and although that they do see the GDP and inflation forecasts being downgraded, that is only a short term, and they still have potential to raise rates at any meeting past next month. So there is still a very, very high chance that they will be raising rates this year. Now, the market will definitely latch onto that and will be today mulling over all the information that come out, and I think ultimately they will come up with a scenario where the US dollar, as I spoke about yesterday, will fall and weaken initially, and then we will see the US dollar strength come back into play. Now, whether it starts tonight or not, I'm not too sure, and that's something I'm still working on, getting my head around, on getting a feel for the market's overall sentiment and what the punters are going to push for the immediate trading session. And maybe it's not until they've had some time to think about it over the weekend before we start to see the US dollar bulls. But I'll get into that in a minute. Tonight we do have account balance. We have the Philly Fed data. We also have the leading indicators. So that will also manipulate the US dollar. And if they all come out positive, we could see people getting back into the US dollar and taking it as an opportunity to get in at lower levels to ride the wave higher throughout towards the end of the year. So bearing that in mind, if you did make some money last night, as a lot of people did, and then took profit, don't just all of a sudden jump back in now that we've had a pullback, because we need to look at the price action and what's actually going on behind that. I'll look at that with the charts a little bit more, but let's have a look at what's coming up on today's session. We do have the SMB interest rate decision. I don't expect a lot to come out of this. The interest rates still should remain as they are. However, they may indicate or may alleviate some of the rumours going around about the new unofficial peg. So we'll have to have a look into that. And the new unofficial peg is supposedly $1.10 with the euro versus the Swiss franc, and they're trying to maintain their currency at a relatively balanced level because it does affect import-export trade and things like that. I don't think we're going to see a huge impact due to this decision here, but the trade balance and all that could affect the Swiss franc. If it's something that you've been trading and you're still into trading, keep an eye out for that data. Other than that, we don't have a lot, but things are starting to heat up in Europe regarding Greece and the European Union and the state of the nation there. So we could start to see that come back into picture now that we have actually initiated the US dollar's outlook, and things have become more clearer. Everybody's a bit more comfortable with the US dollar, so they'll now turn their attention to the next issue. And that will be back to Europe in the coming weeks, and we'll see what happens. But as I said, the data tonight will definitely be the initial jobless claims, continuing jobless claims, the leading indicator, the Fed Philly manufacturing survey. So these will ultimately start to affect the US dollar coming into the US session. Now, Friday, we do have a relatively quiet data, but the Canadian dollar is definitely in play here, and we'll talk more about that tomorrow. But before I get to another video to you guys, the RBA's Glenn Stevens speech will be coming out on Friday. Now, watch this and keep an eye, because there could be some trading opportunities there with the Australian dollar, and depending on how we go with the state of the nation, with what's happening with the US dollar, if we get a negative speech for Glenn Stevens mentioning that that they are looking to cut rates in the future and the economy is not going quite as well, and we may have to be a little bit more proactive, that could definitely weigh on the Australian dollar. If that does come to fruition and we have some US dollar strength coming back in, well, shorting the Australian dollar is definitely a play to be looking at. However, if that is the type of speech and the US dollar weakness is still reigning within the market, you may want to look at the Australian dollar crosses and keep an eye on the Australian dollar versus the CAD and the Australian dollar versus the pound and some other charts like that. And you might be able to trade some breakouts of support and resistance on the back of some major levels where Glenn Stevens starts to talk about the economy. Let's get over to the US dollar index chart. Now, here's the daily chart. As you can see, it's pulled back, but we are still very much within the uptrend. And this is where it's hard for me to give you an indication of where the future direction is, as we could see a support level initiated around here before we start to see it grind higher. And this could have been a big blow, initial reaction, maybe a little bit of an overreaction by the market, and everybody's going to start to support the US dollar moving forward. So we need to keep an eye on that. If I go out to a 6-month chart for you on a daily candle, you'll see that the trend is still very much within range, and we haven't broken any major support levels or anything like that. You need to keep that in mind, and we'll have to see how it pans out. Don't get too excited. If you've made money last night and you're not a seasoned trader, sometimes it's easy for you to just get back into the market because you're all excited and you're all pumped up to hand back some profits because you just want to jump back on it again on that same trade you made money last night. It's not the way to go. And maybe you sit the next 2 days out and you come back to trading on Monday fresh and ready to go again with a clear mind, and you've let the markets decide which direction it wants to go. So that's just a bit of a tip that I've had to employ myself in the early days. Let's get into some charts and see what we can do with making some money. So here we are, and we've seen a massive rally. We broke through a resistance level here on the New Zealand versus the US daily chart, but we still were contained within the overall downtrend. If I am to zoom out, probably not that far, you'll see that the downtrend is still intact. We still have this double bottom. We haven't taken out the major swing low, most recent one, and we are still lower and contained below that. So if we do see the US dollar strength come back in, I do expect this trend to hold its ground, and we could see it grind a little bit lower but still remain within this consolidation pattern. I don't see any major reason for a breakout in either direction. However, if we are looking for the US dollar weakness to kick back into play, and I'm still open to this idea in the short term, well, then we could be looking for support around this area here, as we had historical resistance and historical support could once again become support from the move, a bit of a pullback due to the downtrend, and we could have some scalping opportunities to go long. I'm not looking to go long and expect a breakout of the overall major downtrend. I'm just looking to make some money scalping in this area here if the opportunity prevails. So keep an eye on that. It's a very similar story for the Australian dollar. However, we did get a break of the overall downtrend. It was a pretty big move. If I zoom out for you, you'll see the downtrend here has been broken by this large move to the upside. We got fairly significantly above it and stalled that historical resistance level where we've had price action stall previously. So it all made sense, and now we're having a bit of a pullback, testing the back of the downtrend line on the daily chart. If we go to some shorter time frames, you'll see now that we have tested historical resistance levels and historical support levels. So we could be finding support here, and there could be an opportunity to pick up some money as it bounces off this level and goes high. I'm not willing to call the uptrend as being established and expect the Australian dollar to go higher unless we take out the previous highs. Now, keep in mind that we do have Glenn Stevens' speech tomorrow. If it is a positive one, and he indicates to take a stance similar to New Zealand, indicating that they're going to keep rates on hold and they're going to have a neutral policy, this will definitely lead to an Australian dollar rally. As everybody is still very bearish on the Australian dollar economy, including myself, and I do expect this to be further interest rate cut at some point, well then, we will get a shock and everybody will be adjusting their positions and short covering the Australian dollar, pushing it higher. However, if the speech is not so good, we could get it to stall. Like if we get a bounce off here, it could just be contained tonight within this region here. So you don't want to be holding positions for the long term, expecting it to keep shooting high, because last night we had that enthusiasm and we could get it to stall due to Glenn Stevens' speech, and then this could have been a false breakout of the overall major downtrend, and we could then follow suit with New Zealand and continue lower, as we were mentioning before. So you've got to keep these things in mind, and if the US dollar strength, everybody jumps back onto the US dollar strength, well then definitely this would have been a false breakout, and I do expect it to have a bit of a bounce in the short term. But if the US dollar strength kicks in and Glenn Stevens' speech is weaker in the morning, well then we should fall away. So definitely keep that in mind. I don't want you to hand back any money or pips to the market. Now, we had a massive move in the Great British Pound, and if we have a look at the daily trend here, it was very bearish. We had some weak data coming out of the pound, and that sent it to new lows. And then if I go to a shorter time frame, you'll see that we had it started to send it to new lows, and then we had a bit of a bounce just before the Janet Yellen speech, and the market sort of hovered around and we waited. But then as soon as the data came out, it was just US dollar was sold off heavily, as I've already explained. We've taken out the downtrend line, and then we had a massive flame out at the very key level of $1.50. Now, $1.50 was very key for when the market actually broke this level for it to surprise and go lower. So I'm not surprised that we did sneak our head above it in the market's excitement, but then we have had a bit of a flame out, and everybody got a little bit nervous about, well, hang on, the US dollar strength and the pound data was weak, and then it's now trading back below. So we are in a very interesting position here where we are testing the back of the historical downtrend line, and we could get a bounce off it. And similar to the Australian dollar, we could get a bounce off to the short term and make another run for $1.50. I'm very keen and interested to see whether it actually closes above $1.50 and holds above it firmly and convincingly before I'm actually very bullish on this at all. Now, we could get it to come up to the $1.50 and flame out early and get a bit weaker as the US dollar strength story kicks in. Or we could just get it to continue if going higher, especially if the US dollar weakness continues. So it's definitely a US dollar story. The market is still interpreting that. I haven't got an opinion for you, so I'm giving you both indications. As myself personally will also be looking at the market heading into Europe and heading into the American session, its behavior with the US dollar index. The euro is a very similar story. It was a huge move. Once again, broke out of the major downtrend lines. This is a major breakout, and we spoke about yesterday. I said that it looks like we're forming a bottom pattern, and it looks like we did. And then all of a sudden, we had some very strong, very weak, I should say, Yellen data, and then we've seen exactly the same thing happen. We've seen some profit taking go on, and now the market needs to decide where it wants to go. If I go to a 1 hourly chart, and you see here that we have just dipped our head below $1.08, but now we could get a bounce leading into the European session. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens here as well. Now, all the charts are very similar because it's all US dollar based. So if you need to do a lot of correlation between the charts to try and get a common picture and theme of the US dollar before you jump on. And definitely, as I've mentioned before, don't jump on and think that the trend's just going to continue and you're going to make from the profits from here all the way back up to there again, because it's not guaranteed. It doesn't work like that. Let's have a look at the US dollar CAD now. It's had a bit of a pullback and it's tested the back of the, and I posted a Twitter pic of this last night during the session, back of the previous breakout that we traded and made money off, and now it's back testing the back of it, and it found support right on the back of it. So that's quite interesting, and if the US dollar bulls do come back in this session, we could actually see this grind up higher and make its way towards $1.27. This acting as support before. Now, if the US dollar strength story kicks in, there is no reason why it won't continue to go higher. Don't forget, we also have Canadian data coming out as well on Friday, and that's going to also play an important role. If it comes out weak and we have got a strong US dollar, these highs that were previously made could definitely be threatened, especially if the Canadian is really weak. So keep an eye on that. It's a very technical move. Now, if you have a look at the other key US dollar pair, the US dollar versus the Japanese yen, you'll see that it has bounced off a historical trend line as well. We did have the breakout of the triangle, which we've spoken about. We traded this and then we got back in through here. Now that we do have this falling and we've found support, it's also another very interesting pattern. Now, if the US dollar strength kicks back in, we could see these losses made back up as well. So you definitely need to keep an eye on the US dollar index, and as you can see, we've had a very significant bounce, and where we go to from here is going to be quite interesting. The next few sessions we'll see, and don't try and anticipate the move. Wait for the market to tell you where it's going to go. Be very patient, and then you'll make some good money and you won't hand back some of the profits that you've made. Okay guys, that's it from me today. I've spoken a fair bit. Good luck out there. Be disciplined. I hope that you add a few more pips, or if not, I hope that you're very disciplined. And until tomorrow, trade well.